And welcome back to another episode of the Illinicast, brought to you by Big Banter Sports. My name is Sonny Verma, and I'm going to be your host tonight. We're going to talk about the men's basketball loss. We're going to talk some football news. There's a big game coming up on Saturday. We're going to talk about that. But right now, I plead to you. I ask for you. Look, see that little thumb button on the bottom of the screen? Click that. Click like. And then see the one just to the right called subscribe? Click that. Make sure it has the D at the end. Subscribe. Duh. That helps little channels like me grow. It's nice for us. We show up in YouTube algorithms. It just trust me. Costs you nothing. Please, if you don't mind, let's just go there. First off, let's talk about the men's basketball loss. The number 23 rated Illinois Fighting Illini lost to the number 4 Marquette. What are they called now? The Golden Eagles? I think that's what they used to be, the Warriors back in my day. I think they're Golden something now. A lot of people were upset by that loss. Me, not so much. Going into it, I thought, if you listen to the last episode, I thought it'd be about a 10 to 15 point loss. I wasn't very impressed by what I had seen the first 2 games. And the fact that we kept it as close as we did against Marquette, despite having god-awful shooting, makes me actually a little bit satisfied with that loss. We are what we are. That's the bottom line. From what I saw of Marquette, Marquette is a Final Four capable team. They have a point guard who is probably the best point guard we're going to be facing all year. And obviously, Illinois' biggest flaw is the fact that they don't have a point guard. Kolek had his way. He had his way against us, and it was just one of those where, the only thing more annoying than him scoring every single time he got the ball was the announcers telling us how his ankle was hurt. His ankle was black and blue. We get it. We also watched the game. His ankle was fine. Enough. You saw basically what Illinois' basketball team is going to look like. We have some good 8, 9 players in our rotation, but if the top 2 guys, Shannon and Coleman Hawkins, aren't performing to where they should be performing, then the team's just not going to win. Terrence Shannon had a great game. He had a costly turnover at the end of the game. Coleman Hawkins, though, I don't know. I don't know what to say. First half, he was a huge minus. And it was just one of those. He's kind of been an average to below average player all season long now. And where's his head at? Because you saw it in his second game. You can see he was visibly frustrated. First game, he was just launching 3-pointers and making passes that he should know better now as being, one of the key leaders to this team. Domask's coming out party. He was hitting threes, doing exactly what he needed to do. For me, the question is, the ceiling of this team is going to be, can Domask be your second best player on a team, that's supposed to make the Sweet 16? Sure. Terrence Shannon, he's the alpha. Let him do whatever he needs to do. But, Coleman Hawkins was supposed to be that second guy. And if he's not that second guy, then who is? Is it Domask? Maybe, maybe not. But overall, just, the game is what it was. I predicted us to lose anyway. Marquette are one of the handful of teams that could actually win the championship this year. And Illinois is kind of what we thought they were. Team probably anywhere from 17 to 25 in the country. I still put them right there in the second tier in the Big Ten. Purdue seems to be on a tier of their own. Michigan State has struggled. Pretty much the rest of the Big Ten has struggled, except for Nebraska. I think they're kind of one of the surprise teams. I think I saw them being 4-0 for the first time in Fred Warner's tenure. But it's one of those, Illinois, they've had 2 impressive wins, and they've had a not embarrassing loss against the number 4 team in the country. So I'm not burning any boats yet. It is what it is. And I just want to get the basketball talk out of the way, because today we have 2 very exciting guests. I'm going to bring them on now because we're going to talk a little college football, because I know that's why you guys actually tune in. I have Justin Adams and Jeffrey the Greek. I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves first. Justin, you go ahead first.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on, Sonny. What's going on, Jeffrey? So my name is Justin Adams. I am the Husker Creative, I'll just say creative guy for the Huskers, Nebraska Huskers at the Voice of College Football on Mark Rogers' the Voice of College Football Network. I am also the host over at Cheesy Corn Sports, which is a fantasy football podcast where we help answer start-sit questions, go over the rankings and week performances, stuff like that. So we just have a lot of fun. Sundays 2 hours for the game, talk football. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of my YouTube stuff, and you can find me on X at _H-Town Husker.
And Jeffrey?
I am Jeffrey the Greek, co-host of the Eyes on Big podcast. We've been a Big Ten football specific podcast for, I always forget, 6 years now, quite some time. We talk about all 14 teams. That's kind of our claim to fame, as equally as possible. Obviously, current events sometimes push it that way. But yeah, co-host with typically Big Kurt on and off during the season. So this season, Jordan Eggleston at JW Eggleston 7 has been awesome and filled in. We pick every game in the Big Ten season straight up against the spread, game totals as well to throw that part of the deal in there. And yeah, Big Ten football fan pretty much my whole life. So thanks for having me on.
Oh, thanks for coming on. You're one of my go-to weekly podcasts. So me reaching out and you agreeing to come on is a huge honor on my behalf. So thank you. And Justin, of course, always glad to work with you. So
yes, sir.
If you guys don't mind, I kind of wanted to start it off talking about a story I feel like that doesn't get as much attention nowadays. And there's this football coach in Michigan who apparently there's a story going on up north. Today, it came down that he and the university and the Big Ten Conference have come to an agreement, whatever that means, where Jimmy Harbaugh is going to be suspended 3 games overall. He's already served 1 last week against who was it that they played? Whoever, irrelevant. That's right, Penn State. He's got 2 games left. He's going to miss the game. Whether that's going to matter on November 25th or not, we'll find out soon. But obviously, this has been an ongoing story. It's kind of taken over college football. I feel like the first half of the season was all about Deion Sanders this, Deion Sanders that, Colorado this, Colorado that. Then as soon as Colorado had to play some actual teams that could play college D1 football, the media had to try to find something else. And of course, this whole Michigan story was kind of handed to them on a platter. I kind of tried to stay off for a little while. I was like, I don't care. This is just people yelling at each other. Mm-hmm. But for me, it was really incredible seeing how that Michigan fan base went so hard and became so oblivious to things that, not oblivious to things, let's just say so oblivious to simple logic. Mm-hmm. And to me, like, that kind of drew me into the story. It's somewhat come to its conclusion now. And obviously with the 3-game suspension, Jeffrey, I'll start with you. What do you think? Is that fair? Is that suspension fair? What do you think?
I don't know. I still don't. I'm still not even sure what exactly they did wrong. And do I think they did something wrong? Sure. I'm pretty convinced of that. I probably sound like a broken record when I get asked the question on this a lot. We've talked about it quite a bit on the podcast. Jordan is a Michigan guy, so it's been interesting, getting his take on it as this thing is developed. I always go back to the same thing, which is if this thing happened in the SEC, it would never see the light of day. And I'll just go ahead and keep saying that. So it's hard for me to sit there and pontificate too much on what I think should happen to Michigan. With that being said, I've said all along, what do other coaches think about this? Did they go too far? If they did, how far did they go? They seem to get coaches' input. My guess is behind the scenes, that is what led to the Big Ten Conference reprimanding Michigan, because in their mind, they've got 13 other institutions that they got to keep somewhat happy as well. So this is the best they could come up with, where they could kind of dance on both sides of the fence, which is get Michigan, a little bit of embarrassment, a little bit of a reprimand. At the same time, we're not exactly going to take down our flagship program as it stands right now, with the best chance of us, I think, winning the national championship. I mean, I'm speaking from a Big Ten, football perspective. So if Michigan gets through this 12-0, which basically means, beating Ohio State, I think they'll get by Maryland this weekend. If they pull that off, it's in the rear view mirror and it's done. However, if Michigan loses to Ohio State, expect it to ignite again by Michigan fans, because that's something they're going to point to and say, if we actually had our head coach, it would have helped us in the big game, in the game. So long story short, sorry to talk so much, but that's my thoughts. I think most people are tired of it. They just want to watch football and see it. So hopefully in a couple weeks here, less than 2 weeks, this thing's over with.
Hopefully. I mean, it's the conference and Michigan that came to a resolution today, right? Like, from what I saw on Twitter, like, the NCAA is still looking into Michigan.
Correct.
So, the story may not be over, unfortunately. Justin, what do you think?
Yeah, so I'm in agreement with him about if this happened, the SEC, it would have never came to light. I'm right there with him. And it's funny to watch, like, the whole battle of the networks that people are kind of spinning up, ESPN versus Fox, and saying, like, is Fox trying to sweep it under the rug because of the broadcast deals? Is ESPN trying to funnel it and all this other stuff? There's a lot of sidebar conversations that are making it really interesting and just kind of petty at this point. But the big thing is kind of what he said. I think both sides, this is in their best interest to meet in the middle here, because the Big Ten, for what it's worth, doesn't want to deal with going to the court against Michigan. And then at the same token, Michigan might think that there's something that could maybe lose them this battle in court and potentially get them a stiffer penalty. So I think that's kind of why they came to this middle ground. I think it makes sense for both sides. It kind of gives somewhat of a resolution, because as you've said, the biggest thing for me, like, I was trying to stay out of this too, and the only reason I got into it is because the mental gymnastics for Michigan fans, I just couldn't be quiet on it anymore, because it starts with, this is nothing, to, well, it's something, but it's not this bad, and then it's kind of just taking this level of cope from Michigan fans that I'm seeing, and it's just kind of frustrating to try to even speak with them about it or try to figure out what's going on, because there's such aggression and this superiority complex. Michigan being like, we're the biggest brand, and I don't like the posturing and stuff like that, but I do think this was in the best interest of both teams. I did see an interesting comment somewhere, and I'm curious y'all's take on this too. Will Harbaugh see this as Michigan not really having his back? And maybe that springboard him into leaving. I don't know y'all's take on that. It was just something I saw that I figured would be an interesting note to bring. It was a Michigan fan who said it. He said, unfortunately, I would believe this is Harbaugh seeing that Michigan doesn't have his back or something like that because they gave in. I don't know. But one interesting perspective I did see is that maybe somebody within Harbaugh's inner circle may have known something, right? And that information was given to the NCAA in a way to where the Big Ten can uphold the 3-game suspension, if that makes sense. So they might have thrown something the NCAA's way, so that way the NCAA is backing, the 3-game suspension by them and stuff like that too. And it's what I've heard is maybe somebody within Harbaugh's inner circle, not him himself, but knew about what Connor Stalions was doing, and that could also play a role in this. So
I think the best case scenario for Harbaugh essentially is them winning the national championship this year and then being able to take, whether it's my Bears job or that I hear the Raiders are interested, he gets to kind of get away from all this mess from the NCAA. I mean, it's one thing to say that, he's offended by Michigan not having his back, but we've paid attention to the last 2 off seasons. He's been looking for a reason to get away anyway.
Thought he was leaving regardless, yeah.
Yeah, so for me, it's just he's always kind of needed an excuse. I think if he's able to climb that hurdle and Michigan's able to finally win the national championship, and him being offered an opportunity to get to the next level, I think it's kind of a win-win for both people.
I'd have to agree with that, yeah. Because and for this, like, I think the biggest thing for Harbaugh is he doesn't necessarily want this to be a black eye, but there's I think this might be an opportunity for him to, I think regardless of how this played out, 3-game suspension or not, I think he was gone. So I don't think that really plays a role in it. But I do think this works out in his favor. It's a way to just cut the slate clean. Like you said, there's going to be opportunities that present themselves in the NFL, especially now because teams know, hey, he's going to want to come over probably. So I think it works out. I think it works out for Harbaugh for sure.
Justin, I have a quick question for you.
Yep.
Is there any sort of empathy on your behalf seeing the way Michigan is reacting, considering you are a Houston Astros fan and you guys all did the same damn thing about 4 years ago?
And that's why I can recognize it in Michigan fans, because I was that guy a while back. And so with that, right, like after a while, like it starts, there's phases you go through when your team's caught cheating, right? There's like, well, this kind of sucks. Like, I feel like my team duped me, But then there's this like emboldenedness of like us against the world, and that's kind of what they're taking on. They even stole our concept for the H-Town versus everybody, and they have Michigan versus everybody. So we need our royalties for that in Houston. But I think it's one of those things that's just like I recognize it in them, and it's never going to go away. Just so they know, this is always going to haunt them. Even when all these players are gone, nobody's cheating, they're still going to call you cheaters. So get ready for that.
Jeff, you got anything else, or shall we move on?
Yeah, it's funny. The one thing I was going to add, and Justin already kind of said it, is I've been trying to tell people if you were in the Michigan fans' shoes, my guess is you would sound a lot like a lot of Michigan fans.
Yep.
And then vice versa. If Michigan fans were on the outside looking, if this was Ohio State, they'd be screaming at Ohio State. Like, we're all kind of hypocrites on that stuff a little bit, whether people want to admit it or not. And my last thing that I would say is I know it's gotten out of control because my wife's following it. Even she finds it interesting. And that's when you have crossed into ridiculous, platitudes that we just all need to move on from it.
100%.
Speaking of moving on, we'll go from one of the most obnoxious stories in college football to, one of the best stories in college football. And that's Northwestern hiring Braun, their interim head coach. They've removed the tag, as the hashtag became a little popular over the last couple of weeks. Now, I'm an Illinois fan. Northwestern is our designated rival. I have two different schools of thought on this. I'm happy for the guy. He was put in a situation which had to be the worst in football. He had no plans whatsoever to have the responsibility that he was going to undertake. And he took over a team that had the talent to win 4 games combined the last 2 years. And he's already won 5. So, he's done an incredible job. He was awarded with a 5-year contract. I don't quite know the amount of money. I guess Northwestern's private. They may not even disclose it. But Justin, what do you think?
Yeah, like you said, happy for the guy. Northwestern, again, one of those teams that was, for a while they're just really sneaky, always pretty good Big Ten West team. And then they just, the last couple of years has been horrible. I think their defense was giving up near 30 points a game average over the last 2 seasons. And, he's come in and those players are bought in. You could tell the players have bought in, which means they trust him, which means he's a good leader, right? So all that proof's in the pudding right there. The dude's a good leader. He's well-spoken. And he came in there and he said all the right things, right? Like, he didn't come in there saying he was going to do too much. He was basically saying we're going to put one foot in front of the other when he was introduced there. And that's all he's done. He's taking it game by game. He's got, like I said, he's got these players bought in, got the defense playing at an excellent level. Their turnover margin the last couple of years minus 24. It's been plus 5 this season. So that's all him, right? Like, the talent is the same, if not, somewhat worse than it was, but he's come in there and he's got the players playing at a high level. And this is exactly what Northwestern needs, because if this season went down the drain and they had to do a whole coaching hire, that's another year where they're not getting in the recruiting cycle and stuff like that. This was a godsend for Northwestern, and now they can start really recruiting under him, and he's already building those relationships. So it really springboards Northwestern to get back to where they were a few years back. So yeah, great story, like you said, though.
Jeffrey?
I hate it. Northwestern is going to be good again. I mean, I don't want to hide this. We cover all 14 teams, but another thing that we say is we're not going to hide who we are. I'm an Iowa fan. My co-host, Michigan, Illinois fan. So since, for the longest time, Kurt being an Illinois fan, me being an Iowa fan, one thing that we could share in is how annoyed we were with Northwestern being as good as they were over the years. I'll be honest, looking over the last 2 years, and then going into this year, my thought process was, oh man, I think Northwestern's going to stink. Finally, just an auto win on the schedule, right? Type of deal. I feel like we could use some more of those in the Big Ten, if I'm being honest, 1 or 2 more auto wins. And I remember, I don't know how much you guys watch the Big Ten Network, when they do the camp tours. Yep. I check all those things out, just see little info I can pick out. And one just sticks in my head is when they interviewed Braun and they said, how's the team looking? And he paused. I mean, we're talking a good 2-3 second pause. And he said, we got a lot of work to do. And I remember thinking like, oh, sweet baby Jesus, they are going to stink. Like that was my confirmation. The first game out of the year, they get boat raced by Rutgers. And not that I thought Rutgers was going to be horrible. I didn't think they were going to be beating anybody 24-0 Rutgers. And they win the next week and then lose and then win. And by the way, they've won, lost, every game this year. And every game they've gotten better, 5% better, and it's just incredible what he's done. I mean, if he wins Big Ten Coach of the Year, which I think if he gets to a bowl, he's certainly in the running. It's incredible. Don't get me wrong. It is a feel-good story. It just doesn't make me personally feel all that good, but it is amazing what he's done. That's the honest truth.
This year, for Illinois, especially now, we were kind of counting on that Northwestern win to get us, either clinching a bowl or getting a better bowl. So, as Jeffrey, as you brought up, the fact that they have lost every other weekend. Well, we're on schedule to lose to Northwestern then in 2 weeks. So that's, that doesn't make me too happy. It's a feel-good story, but for me, I think it's one of those where let's see what happens in the offseason. The coaches that they have now were signed on with Pat Fitzgerald. Come off season, Braun is a new guy. They're not necessarily his guys. They may look for new opportunities. We don't know what his recruiting is going to be like. He's never recruited at this level before. He's never coached at this level before. So it's a wonderful story for this year. And the fact that they won 5 games, again, they won 4 the last 2 years combined, is an amazing story. And, as one of our protected rivals moving forward, it's in my best interest that Northwestern isn't the Northwestern of the prime Pat Fitzgerald era. It's a bummer for me as an Illinois fan to see how successful he's been this coming year, but I'm also not ready to anoint him as the next Pat Fitzgerald because I really want to see that he just could be riding a high right now. We see what's going on with Mississippi State. They essentially gave Will Arnett that head coaching job, and I don't think he survived his first year. Mm-hmm. He just wasn't ready for it. So it's a story where, fairy tale start. And, maybe that's all they just kind of need is kind of a transition. Maybe they need a feel good story after that Fitzgerald. And then in a year or two, he kind of flames out. But then the Fitzgerald story is kind of old and the stink is gone from the Northwestern job. And, they're able to, because, being a Big Ten job, they're going to have candidates. They're going to have money to bring in a top-notch coach. And, it's kind of I guess I'm just kind of in a wait-and-see mode.
Can I piggyback on that?
Sure, of course.
To your point, I think Northwestern, though, I think schools like Northwestern that don't have a history of winning and stuff like that, I think schools like that are going to benefit from these storylines in recruiting. I think the storyline in and of itself, and that's getting eyes onto Northwestern winning. That's getting eyes onto Northwestern. That's getting recruits' attentions. So I think that in and of itself, regardless of the coach, is just going to help them in recruiting because Northwestern's relevant. If they come out here and win 1 game and, have to do a coaching search this offseason, nobody's really paying attention to Northwestern. No recruits are looking to go there. So I think the storyline for a school like them, I think it helps them to an extent at that phase in the season. Transfer portal as well.
Yeah. NIL. I hope they win 6 games this year and then 8 next year, and then some big school hires him away and they hire Tim Beckman to be their coach. There's my hope.
Co-sign to that.
You can get Scott Frost.
Yeah.
You can take Scott Frost.
All right. Let's now talk about the reason everyone's tuning in right now. There's a man who's got a very important quarterback decision coming up for this weekend for a very important game. Justin, I'm going to start with you. Should I start Justin Fields or CJ Stroud on my fantasy team this?
Stroud. Is that a question? Come on. He's lighting the world on fire right now.
Obviously, I'm talking about the Iowa and Illinois game. And Jeffrey, I saw the stat earlier today, and I knew this was going to happen moving forward, but I still kind of got sad inside. Like, this is going to be the first time in X amount of years, or next year, that Illinois and Iowa are not going to play head-to-head.
Yeah.
Like, the next time we're going to play after this is like 2026 and 2028. And again, that's a bummer for you guys because for the most part, you guys have had pretty decent success for us. And you guys are loaded with rivals. Everyone was basically begging to be a protected rival of Iowa, whereas Illinois kind of doesn't. We have the natural one with Northwestern, and we have one-ish with Purdue. So, Iowa and Illinois basketball hate each other. I think the hate is more from Illinois fans towards Iowa in football than Iowa fans really give credit to Illinois. Again, that's my opinion. But what do you think? What do you think about the rivalry?
What I think about the rivalry, certainly, I'm a much more of a football guy than basketball. Don't get me wrong. I follow basketball, just fine, just not to the degree of football and my understanding of it. But enough to know that I can't stand Illinois basketball fans. So definitely feel it there. Really didn't hear much from Illinois football fans for years and years, as I pick up followers on Twitter and, we pick up listeners on the podcast. Then they got good, Beetle got there and got them running and they came out of the woodwork and started talking some smack. And I'm like, oh, all right, here we go. We got some Illinois football fans, and then Illinois finally got the win over Iowa last year. And boy, they came on full force. That's all it takes. Right. And then I'm like, okay, yeah, I think I got enough room in my heart to dislike Illinois football fans as well. That's been fine. But I'll be honest with you, for the most part, it was more of a rivalry to me back in the day. Okay. I'm old enough to remember the 90s. All right. My brother played football at Iowa, so I remember, some really good Illinois teams and that. But over the years, yeah, I mean, obviously with Illinois struggling, it certainly got pushed down the list. But my gosh, the list for Iowa, Iowa State, Nebraska, Minnesota, Wisconsin, my God, we got 4 trophies that if you go 3-1 in those trophy games, the one you don't win is the one Iowa fans are going to talk about the most. It's tough, so I don't like Illinois going away. I just want to say that I don't like any of this. I want to play the same regional teams all the time. I wish that's how it was, but it's not going to be a rivalry that I'll necessarily lose sleep over losing, but I don't like it. At the same time, I want to be clear. I wish Iowa and Illinois were playing every year.
I guess before we get into the game, just to kind of piggyback on your topic, name Iowa's top 5, in your opinion, hated rivals in order.
Mine.
Your personal as an Iowa fan.
Yeah.
Wonder who's won.
Boy, that's tough. Probably Nebraska's number 1. I'm gonna be honest with you. And then Iowa State, very close. It's like 1A. It's like 1A and 1B there a lot of times. Minnesota would be 3rd for me. Wisconsin 4. As far as 5, I mean, you can kind of fill it in. Sometimes it's Penn State. Illinois. It's a little bit more difficult with that, but it's a lot of rivalries. It's exhausting, to be honest with you.
Yeah. All right. We'll start talking about the game a little bit, and there's been stories going back and forth about Bret and whether he announced a quarterback or not. 2 days ago on Sirius XM radio, in the morning, actually I think it was yesterday in the morning, he he basically, the tweet went out that he says Luke Altmyer's healthy and Luke Altmyer is the starter. So Illinois Twitter went insane. Big Ten Twitter, went nuts, all talking and second guessing Bielema and how do you bench a guy who just threw 500 yards. And I kind of understood, but I have been kind of going back and forth with this decision in my own head. On the post-game review on Sunday, I actually said that I would consider starting Altmyer. No, sorry, I would start Paddock. And Austin thought I was crazy. Austin said you had to go with Altmyer. And then I logged onto Twitter and I saw pretty much like 80% of Illinois Twitter was on my side, starting Paddock.
Yeah.
I started thinking it over a little bit more. I heard what Bret said yesterday morning. And then as I've got a couple of friends who were big Hawkeye friends, and they were saying, and I guess this is how else, actually, I come from an Illinois perspective. Let's hear like the outsider's perspective first. Jeffrey, go ahead.
Yeah, I joked on the podcast. This is one of the rare times where I think Iowa and Illinois fans are agreeing on it, meaning that I think the best quarterback to play is Paddock. You see the stats aren't everything. Certainly catching Minnesota kind of on their heels. And then there were busted coverages with Indiana. I'll be bold to say I don't think he would have 500 yards and 5 touchdowns versus this Iowa defense. With that being said, suddenly you see the wide receivers. It's almost like the wide receivers have as many stats in the last game and a half a quarter that they have the whole previous year combined. Suddenly these wide receivers look good in catching the ball. It's not a coincidence. It has to be the guy throwing the pill. So like, I know that's part of it. He suddenly, Pat Bryant is suddenly open, even if he's covered, like Isaiah Williams suddenly always, running across the middle and he's getting hit. So I would think Paddock is the right choice. It seems like the Illinois players just love the dude, but this is the murkiness of Division I football, in my opinion, from what I'm hearing behind the scenes. There's pressure from the Altmyer family squad. Promises were made, as in, if I'm healthy and doing my job, I'm the starter. And Justin, I see you shake your head. I support you shaking your head at the same time. It's tough because coaches want to hold up their end of the bargain as well. So I'm not saying it's the right answer, but at the same time, it's not as easy as maybe it seems to be. And lastly, let's say they start with Lukey legs. Okay. If the offense isn't moving, you can switch to Paddock. Okay. We've already shown that he has the ability to come in the game. That's what I think we'll see. It would be my prediction that Altmyer starts the game, isn't as effective, and Paddock comes in. My guess is Phil Parker will be getting his guys ready for both quarterbacks.
Yeah, I think my thing on is I agree, Paddock, easy. But here's my reasoning why. If you look at Altmyer, right, the ceiling's lower with Altmyer in probably most of our opinion. So on paper, the matchup, right, Iowa's much better than Illinois on paper. So to me, you have to ride the hot hand right now. That guy is, there's a reason the Illinois fan base wants him. He was talking about the players, rallying around this guy, the story, that everything's there. The last 2 games of the season, you got to ride something like that and just hope that can carry you on those last couple of games. Just ride that momentum, because it's not going to carry you through a full season, of course, but it can carry you through these last couple of weeks. If you go to him, and of course, Iowa's defense being as good as it is, you're going to need the one that gives you the best opportunity to score points. And right now, that's Paddock. And so, the Altmyer parents thing, the parents, the whole parent thing in this, and trying to like push, my son, like, it reminds me of like Little League Baseball, So that in a way is frustrating. I know, especially if you're an Illinois fan, to try to deal with stuff like that. But yeah, Paddock, the ceiling is much higher with him. The offense is going to play well comparatively to what they would look like against Iowa with Altmyer. I think they'll look better against Iowa. I don't know if they necessarily look good, but yeah, it's got to be him for sure. You just got to take that and just run that as much as you can, and just till the wheels fall off. But a couple games left, they might not.
The one thing I would add, I agree with all that. The one thing I would add is I do think there's maybe a little bit more feast or famine with Paddock. So if you get the feast, obviously that's good.
Yeah.
I wonder if maybe there's a little too much confidence,
Yeah.
and when he starts to force the ball against a very disciplined Iowa defense, although we're down one guy, that hurts dearly. Iowa typically makes you pay with that. Altmyer throws some picks too, right? So I'm not saying that that's not there. Uh, Something to look out for. I predict. I said on the podcast I could see Illinois winning this game 27-13, or Iowa winning the game 27-13, depending on where the feast or famine comes from. But that probably is just me talking myself into hoping that they play Lukey legs, because I
Yeah.
I do feel like that probably fits what we want to see a little bit more.
See, now my opinion, as someone who's watching every single game, every single snap, is I think a lot of people, as they tend to do naturally, kind of live in the moment.
Mhm.
Illinois had reasonably high expectations coming into the season. I saw projections anywhere from second to fourth. A couple of people had them winning the division, and we stumbled out of the gate. And the two games that we had on primetime were against Penn State, where Luke Altmyer threw 4 interceptions. We all saw that game, and the Friday night game where Illinois played against Nebraska. Nebraska won 20-7. Nebraska played awful, but Illinois just played worse. It was
That was
one of the worst
ugly.
football games I've ever seen in my
That was
life.
terrible. It was the worst
Um,
until the next week Nebraska game, and then that became the worst. So,
and then essentially after that, we had lost to Purdue, and we thought the season was over. Our offensive line was in shambles. Luke Altmyer's touchdown to interception ratio was going the wrong way drastically. And we had Maryland up next, and we thought the season was over. Maryland at the time was 5-0. Then they just lost to Ohio State after putting up a pretty decent fight in the first half. And then we started making some changes on the offensive line. We started moving guys around. We basically, our starting running back, Reggie Love, got hurt. So we lost our second and third running backs, and we handed the reins over to a 4-star freshman named Caden Fagan. Then all of a sudden, things started turning around. We had a pretty impressive victory against Maryland. We were dominant in the first 3 quarters against Wisconsin. We had an 18-point lead. Johnny Newton, in a 60-40 call, I'll say, got ejected.
Yeah.
And Wisconsin came back and won that game. We followed that up with a pretty solid win over Minnesota. Minnesota's a pretty solid, competitive Big Ten West team. And then we saw the game against Indiana last week. Now, putting the Indiana game to the side, I just want to talk about the games in the middle. Luke Altmyer win in that Minnesota game was something like 17 for 21 with 3 touchdowns and 1 interception. Since that Penn State debacle, Luke Altmyer has 1,300 yards, 10 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. The offensive line, that Bret specialty, the coaching staff has somewhat figured it out. We went from an awful, bottom tier P5 offensive line to at least average. We've gotten the emergence of Caden Fagan as our running back. We've turned into the team that I thought we were going to be coming into the year.
Mm-hmm.
Luke is playing just fine. Like I hope, like I don't sound cocky when I say this, but there's a chance that Illinois has 2 of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten West.
y'all beat us for sure.
So, obviously the drive against Minnesota, Justin, you and I were texting back and forth because I couldn't watch it anymore. Paddock comes in. Minnesota had no time to prepare for Paddock. He throws 3 amazing passes, 88 yards, touchdowns. Context matters. It was against prevent defense. Minnesota didn't really have any time to prepare for this guy. In the Indiana game last week, I think Luke Altmyer would have thrown for 350, if not 400 yards in that game. Our guys were getting past their defensive backs like I've never seen all season long. Now, there's a difference between the two. Paddock doesn't panic nearly as much. Lukey Legs, we know Lukey Legs, he offers a different dimension in the sense where he can run the ball. He can scramble. If nothing's there, and we saw it at the first half of the season when our offensive line was just god awful, Luke would extend drives for us. Get a 15-yarder here, a 7-yarder here, run for a 35-yarder here, a 60-yarder. He can do that. He can bring that faster to the game. John Paddock, and I don't know if it's just because he's in the 6th year of NCAA football, he makes decisions very quickly. I think I saw a stat of all quarterbacks who've taken 60 snaps, he's got the quickest release time from snap. It's like 2.5 seconds. And that's huge. So again, I come in like 2 schools of thought against Iowa. And this is how I justify it in my head. I think if Luke starts, we have a good chance of getting anywhere from 14 to 17 points against Iowa. Okay. Now, can Iowa get to 14, 17? I don't know, but we have good, we've got a solid running back, wide receivers, quarterback. I think I just saw, I think, Justin, you guys talked about it it was a different show. Illinois has got a top 5 passing offense in the Big Ten. I didn't even know that. We've got a pretty decent offense, and yeah, Iowa's been feasting on all these unders, but they're not exactly playing real offensive juggernauts either. Illinois, I think, is going to be one of the better offensive teams that Iowa has played in a few weeks. So I think we can get to 14, if not 17 points. I think Paddock, on this insane run that he's on, can hit the 20s. But Paddock can also have us shut out. Iowa's now got a week, almost 2 weeks, of game tape on John Paddock. And you're giving Phil Parker that much time for a guy who was just an average MAC quarterback last year.
Do you mind if I throw something in on that point?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, yeah, higher ceiling for him, lower floor. I think you take that risk, though, because if he's only able to get you, or if you feel like he's able to get you in this box, well, you're boxed into that high end. You're going to need to exceed whatever that window is to be able to beat Iowa, because they're the better team. So, just throwing that in there, I think you have to take the riskier play, because the floor versus 13 is maybe still a loss, but that 20 to maybe 27, that might be the difference between a win.
And I think
the counter to that is, but if you start out with Lukey legs, see how he does.
Yeah,
maybe you're just fine with Lukey legs. If you're down by 10, which is like 20 on most teams, then you put Paddock in and see, because at that point you got nothing to lose.
I think that's a great idea. Yeah, honestly, I think that's probably the best the thing is just like you said, just let it go and give him a couple drives and just see, because I think, Sonny, you said that Illinois is slow starting anyways, so that may work out in their favor.
More so the first half of the season. Yeah. If a gun to my head, I actually think Bret's going to do the opposite. I think Bret is going to start with Paddock and see if the magic is still there. Because the key is, if you get 14 point head start on Iowa, you're putting Iowa in a position where they may not be built to come back.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have a couple 3-and-outs and you see, the defensive backs, clamping on the wide receivers, and you kind of get a glimpse of Paddock from what he was performing against Penn State, the last time he played a really good defense, you have your starting quarterback, Luke Altmyer, still there. So I think that's what Bret's actually going to do. I think he's going to go the reverse. I think he's going to see if the magic is still there with Paddock. Maybe you guys kind of talked about it. Altmyer, this is his first full season as a starter. Whereas Paddock, he's in his 6th year of college football. He has this confidence in his interviews, and, he's won the love of his teammates just because he's so happy. He's so grateful. And he's got, and this is not the right word, but he's got this cockiness to him. And you can see it when he throws that ball. And maybe, I think that's what you need against Iowa, because there's not a lot of people that are giving us any chance to win this game. And again, for me, I think he's going to start with Paddock. I think that's what I would do too. I know I made a whole argument right now about Luke Altmyer, but I think personally, you have to see there's this beauty of college football. And John Paddock is kind of the personification of that. So let's see if John Paddock can, continue the magic against Iowa. We can continue it against Northwestern, and somehow John Paddock, with this amazing Illinois legacy story leads us to the Big Ten West champion, or the Big Ten championship, when we thought our season was over after week 5.
Can I ask you a question though about something you said earlier? So I remember
Sure.
you mentioned Paddock. The receivers were getting more separation with Paddock versus Altmyer. The thing is, my question is it the same game plan? Are they calling the same plays for both? Would those receivers also be open for Altmyer that are open for Paddock, if the game was called differently?
I don't know if I said they were getting more open for Paddock. I think it was the Indiana defensive backs, and I don't know what defensive.
All right, yeah, that week. Would that have happened against Altmyer? Was the game plan different? Do they scheme different for Paddock versus Altmyer?
With Altmyer, you can run, as long as you have a good established running game, you can run an RPO, because Luke can get, as we talked about earlier, he can extend drives by himself. Paddock, he's going to hike the ball. He's going to look at, first, second, third reads, and he'll make a decision very quickly. But if he doesn't, that Iowa defensive line will get to him. Luke will hold on to the ball a little bit longer, and he's probably going to take a couple more sacks. But there's also going to be a play there on third down, on 3rd and 7, where he's going to be able to find a hole, and he's going to be able to get 9, 11 yards there to extend the drive, to hold on to the ball. And that's kind of one of the keys I feel like, you kind of need against an Iowa team. So, again, I keep going back and forth. Right now, I'm 60-40 start Paddock.
I was trying to poke holes in your Altmyer one for you, so help you out, because, I mean, if they're different skill sets, so they could have honestly schemed a little bit more for Paddock, to throw the ball, and that could have been why they got more separation. Had they had Altmyer in there and called the game a little differently, maybe it would have went a little different. So there's also that.
I know Tommy Allen was pulling his hair out at halftime at the end of the game on how many passing lanes they were leaving open. There was some sort of communication. So it's always hard to tell. I think even if you ask coaches half the time, they might give you an answer. They're walking off the field that surprises anybody.
Yeah,
We gave up 45 points to Indiana, so it's not like we had some defensive performance that we're bragging about either. We just happened to come out on the better end at the end. Jeffrey, you guys had some big news too this week. Yesterday was reported Cooper DeJean was did he break his fibula? Was that it? Did he break his leg, or?
Yeah.
And now he's going to be out.
Lower leg. Yep.
He's going to be out for the year. What kind of impact is that going to have for Iowa?
Massive.
For the rest of the year, essentially?
Well, personally, I'd just like to talk about how much it's affected me, because it's really bummed me out. I'm just joking a lot. Just tough news. Native son, small town Iowa guy, keeps his mouth shut, does his job. I mean, it's just hard not to love the guy with all of the production he's had in splash plays as well. Essentially he affects the game in 2 different ways. It was getting to be 3 different ways, because they had him run, taking snaps on offense. Defense, we have a really good defense. I've seen enough Phil Parker defenses to say when we lose players, the defense still remains. I want to be clear, he's a good cover corner. He's not an elite cover corner, okay? Better in zone. He'll probably wind up playing safety, which kind of adds some hilarity to it in the NFL. So the loss going from the next guy down to him, Deshaun Lee, Corey Harris, depending on how you want to look at it, for getting flipped, it's a step down. Maybe not as big of a step down, but it hurts leadership in the backfield. Probably hurts more on special teams. He is an expert gunner. His ability to locate those balls by the great Torrey Taylor and down him. I mean, we're not just talking about inside the 10. We're talking inside the 3. It's just incredible what those two have. So that's a field position thing, obviously huge to how Iowa plays the game. Also, from what I can tell, punters have just stopped punting the ball to him. They punt it, they sky it as high as they can, so their coverage team has a chance to get underneath it, or they get it out of bounds, which is tough for punters. They wind up shanking them about half the time, because that's hard to do. That leads to field position. My guess is you're going to see Illinois punter, name escapes me right now, just say, screw it. Let's see if this guy can, number one, field the ball, which is one of the hardest things to do in all of sports, is field a punt. And then number two, if this guy fields the ball, it'd probably be Caden Wetjen. Once he fields the ball, can he do something with it? So it's a huge thing to look at. Only have to go back 1 year almost to the day when Cooper DeJean went out of a game. It affected Iowa horribly, both with him covering and then punt return, because our backup punt return went in that game, fumbled it. That was 14 points right there, and the difference in the game. Now, it's a little bit different when it happens in the game as opposed to 3-4 days of practice, but it speaks to what that dude meant to the team and what he has meant the last 2-3 years.
Yeah, I think you're right on with that, because for me, like, Iowa seems like the team. Iowa's the type of team that I don't think one player will ever throw them off completely. So while he is a huge loss in the ways that he said, a leader, and then also he's a game breaker, so he hurts in that way. But I think with Iowa, the way they're structured and the way they recruit and how solid that team is as a unit, I think it affects them, but marginally, as opposed to, maybe another team that would lose their star player. So I think it impacts them slightly. But yeah, we'll see. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
I mean, you guys have lost your top 3 tight ends, your starting quarterback. I mean, the fact that you guys are at now, 8-2?
Get me started on injuries.
It's another feather in, France's cap. Where does 400 yards come from last week? What happened? I didn't watch the game, but what?
Yeah, and part of it is Rutgers defense was just out on the field all day, all into the evening because of Iowa's defense. So certainly a big reason that the Iowa's offense looked good is because of the Iowa defense, but field position, all that stuff. I will say, there's been a little bit of switch along the offensive line to continue on with the theme tonight. Different center, last 2 games, it's looked better. Things have kind of shuffled around a little bit. The pass pro versus Rutgers looked as good as the pass pro has in a long time. That's part of the reason why Deacon Hill could have some success. Caleb Brown, wide receiver over from Ohio State, suddenly he pops in the game. And I got to say, Deacon Hill just looked better. He stepped up in the pocket, planted his feet. Not that I'm a quarterback guru by any stretch, but you could just tell he was just throwing a more confident football. And then once that happens, guess what happens? You're off. You can rush the ball a little bit better when you get linebackers back on their heels at least a little bit. So it all fit together. It took some time, though. I mean, a lot of that offense didn't happen until third and fourth quarter, but it does look better. Nobody's going to sing the praises of Brian Ferentz, but I will say, if you take out the number 1 quarterback, number 1 and 2 pass catchers, our running backs were shuffled for weeks at a time too. Offensive line have been in and out. You're going to take a hit on your offensive numbers. I mean, obviously, Nebraska and Iowa have been having an injury contest with their offensive squads this year, so it's going to hurt you, right? It's going to hurt you. So I got to give Brian Ferentz credit for just staying at it. I was glad once we knew the news. I understood why they kept him as the offensive coordinator. He's still, whether people like it or not, the best person on staff to lead the offense the rest of the year. The dude's a grinder. Things look a little bit better, but we still got 2, 3, 4 games left.
I think if that Iowa offense shows up that played against Rutgers, you guys will cover the spread easy.
Let's hope that doesn't happen for both our sake.
Okay. Yeah, we're going to get to that right after this. But I think, one of the key battles that's going to come down to Saturday with my kind of prediction is which weakness performs better. Our secondary has been awful. They're very, obviously we lost 3 defensive backs in the top 70 picks to the NFL. And so anytime a quarterback has any amount of time to throw, they're going to find a wide receiver. Enter Jazon Newton, who's basically been a one-man wrecking crew. I mean, he's been as dominant of a lineman since, like, I mean, I've heard names like Ndamukong Suh, and that's kind of what kind of reminds me of, like, the game plan. Every single game, you're seeing three guys basically try to cover Newton, and Newton's still on a finalist for Defensive Player of the Year. You see, up 18, he gets ejected from the game against Wisconsin, and all of a sudden the defense is in shambles. So for me, like, one of the key is going to be how, if Johnny can give you guys trouble and get to your quarterback, and how Deacon Hill responds to that. And because you're obviously, I'm not being mean when I say your offense isn't exactly one of your stronger focuses. So if Jer'Zhan Newton can cause havoc and make your offense kind of inept, is your inept better than my inept? When it comes to, it's your offense against our secondary, essentially, is what I'm saying. That's where I'm coming from. Right?
No, it's a great point. I love I can't remember how you worded it right now, but whose weakness will play better. That's fantastic. Because the other thing with Johnny is he's right up the middle, and let's just say Big Deke ain't exactly the most fleet-footed, quarterback you ever seen. Drives me absolutely nuts. So that certainly makes me nervous. I said on our podcast, I hope they move the pocket. I hope we boot out. I hope they can get Deacon away. I hope we're not arrogant with our pass pro. If he is just wrecking it, get somebody in there to help against the guy to try to have some success. It is definitely the big storyline in this game. I mean, every now and then Johnny gets tired and he goes out, and it's like the offensive coordinator for other team goes, he's out, go, like, hit the gas, go. Like, they try to get points on the board. We'll see if Iowa, kind of does the same thing if he goes, out of the game.
That's exactly what happened against Indiana. Anytime Jer'Zhan Newton went onto the sidelines, Indiana just ran straight up the middle. Every single time, got 100%. 4 or 5 yards. And then as soon as Johnny came back, all of a sudden they have to kind of switch their game plan out again.
Mm-hmm. I take offense to one thing. Never compare that man to
the Suh comment. Yeah.
We compared the two. And Ndamukong Suh is certainly more consistent, and Ndamukong Suh also surrounded by more talent on that defense
that
as
defense
well. So for sure.
Obviously, with the three of us here, our three teams have the 3 best shots into getting into that Big Ten championship. Jeffrey, obviously,
I don't feel that way.
It's just, what a Cinderella story for the Big Ten West. Like, just the most garbage year of all time. The Illinois fan base was pretty much done with the year after week 5, and here we are 2 weeks left in the season, and we're like, wait, hold on, we have a chance to actually still go down to Indy. Iowa obviously just needs to win 2 games, so I know, Justin, you're going to be a huge Illinois fan on Saturday.
Oh, yeah.
Jeffrey, how confident are you? Like, what do you think? You think you can squeeze out one of these wins?
I'll be honest with you. I'll be a fan here. Every fan is boisterous, out in public, but behind the scenes, you're like, oof. If we lost the last 2 games and didn't get to Indy, that would suck. That would sting. Yeah. Am I confident that we can win one of the next 2? Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty confident. Iowa's pretty tough to beat in Kinnick, especially when it's getting to be about nighttime. So, I feel pretty good, but not overly confident, especially with Cooper DeJean being out. If Iowa loses versus Illinois, they can also get in by beating Nebraska. Haven't lost there in over a decade, I believe it is, in Memorial Stadium. What's that?
The games are always, the last few years, just been steadily close,
Always close. But if you look at Iowa's record in the close games, they're pretty good. They're pretty good at that.
Yeah.
Like
they find a way to win.
I always think of the Bane quote, "Oh, you adopted the dark. I was born in the dark." That's how Iowa is in these close, ugly games. Like,
they don't beat themselves, though.
We do.
They don't beat themselves. And that's what wins them these games.
Right. And until we keep saying the same thing every week on the podcast, Justin. I don't know if you listen. We just keep saying, I said it again this week. If Nebraska doesn't turn the ball over, they'll beat Wisconsin. We feel very confident. We keep saying it,
Be a
and
9-win
then you
team.
keep turning the ball over. Yeah. So like we see the same things, but at some point it's, it's part of your DNA. But one of the, I would, statistically speaking, one of these next two games, probably you won't turn the ball over, and you'll be very, very formidable. But that's where I'm at. I don't know if I've really answered the question. Like, I think we'll get there. We could actually still get there even if we lose the next two games for how this thing works out. I mean, we keep joking on the podcast. Like I kept saying the theme is at 5-5 teams, Wisconsin's in the boat as well. Technically Minnesota and Northwestern are, their chances of getting in are basically astronomical, but it's just insane that there are 5 teams. Right? Am I right? 5 teams that could get to Indy, but also miss a bowl. either or. It's never seen anything quite like it.
And
Justin, you got a final prediction?
Yeah, for y'all's game, or just if we're getting in?
We can do that after.
Yeah. Shoot, I haven't really thought of a prediction. I'm thinking maybe let's go 2013 Iowa.
Jeffrey, what do you think?
Yeah, a prediction on the podcast, since we already recorded, I'll let it go. I got 21-20 Iowa. So I got an Iowa win, an Illinois cover, quite a bit over. That's 10 points over the game total, which people once I've got it. Yeah, some people get on me on the podcast once I throw my predictions out on Twitter on usually around Friday around noon. That's when people really get active. People are gonna come right at me for having the craziness to predict 1 points in the game. But I do think there are gaps in the defense for Illinois. That what I'm trying to get at is maybe Iowa can actually score some points, and with Illinois being hot, throwing the ball, having some chances there. So like people aren't maybe paying his attention as much as they could, that these offenses actually look a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what it's going to come down to as well, essentially. Does Iowa get that one extra game-breaking moment, or does Isaiah Williams get, slip through and get a 75-yard touchdown final score? I'm going to make a prediction, but I'm also going to say something afterwards. I have 21-17 Iowa, but I'll also say that up until 2 weeks ago, every time I predicted an Illinois win with the final score, they lost. And so I swapped up my strategy, and we've turned the season around. So there's some extra thinking behind the score prediction I just made.
Yeah, that's smart. Just fade your own fade guy. So,
all right, guys, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I
swear that stuff works.
Yeah, it does.
Let's once again, where can these my listeners find you guys? Justin, you go first.
So again, I'm over at Nebraska Football at the Voice of College Football over on Mark Rogers' Voice of College Football Network. I am also on Cheesy Corn Sports, both on YouTube. And you can follow me on X, Twitter, whatever you call it, at the _H-Town Husker. So.
And I am Jeffrey the Greek at Jeffrey the Greek. You'll find me most on Twitter. I put the tweets out every Wednesday and Sunday with our preview and game recaps during the season. But you can find the Eyes on Big podcast on all the platforms. Spotify, we have the most luck with Apple. If you got any questions, hit me up on Twitter and go from there.
All right, gentlemen. Jeffrey, I don't wish you guys luck the remaining 2 games. Sorry. Not a personal thing. Justin, I hope you guys lose on Saturday, because I think we need Wisconsin to beat you guys. But if you lose next week and we win, then I'll root for you guys against Iowa in 2 weeks.
I think I'm trying bring them on your show, and then
I think you're right.
That whole mess. But thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Iowa game's on Saturday. We should have a post-game recap, or Sunday or Monday, and then we'll have Northwestern next week, and we'll talk to you guys then.
Thanks a lot.